That's effing sweet.
Hi everybody, it's Joe Krug from Finsweet with a walkthrough showing you how to integrate Weglot with Webflow. In this video, we go over the UI kit for Weglot. Here at Finsweet, we built a custom UI kit that works with Webflow and Weglot. We're using Webflow Interactions. We have custom built UI components, and with some custom JavaScript, it's going to integrate perfectly with Weglot. We're going to start with the most basic implementation of copy pasting what we did in this UI kit all the way into what we did with JavaScript and why we did it. This is a really nice way to implement Weglot with a custom field. Let's jump in and see how it works. We are in the UI kit build. We have this site clonable. Go ahead and clone it if you are planning to use these elements on your site. We've built the entire thing to be an easy copy paste into your project. Before we get into Designer, let's see this working live. We're on a webflow.io link. We're not going to be loading our subdomains, but these UI elements are built for adding your subdomain in a full live URL environment. All right, let's see what these look like. You can see that as I'm switching the language here, we are translating the page. And when I go to these different languages, we have a nice Webflow interaction making a really nice switch of the language, and we're actually changing the language with Weglot. This custom UI does use custom code. This is not as simple as just building it in Webflow and then adding href or data attributes. We are using custom code here to make the connection of Webflow interactions with Weglot. Remember, this is built as a copy and paste environment. If you do not care about the code, you don't care about the structure, no problem. You're just going to copy, you're going to paste, and we're going to look at how all of this works. As you go further and further into this video, we're going to dive deeper and deeper into how we set this up, why we set it up, and even go through the custom code. All right, let's jump into Designer, see how all this is working. We're in Designer and we're going to look at each of these UI components. We built all of these components in the same way. They follow the same structure. They have the same mindset in terms of applying Webflow interactions. And we did that so that you can watch this one video and see how all of these are implemented. This video, understanding how this works, is going to let you use any of these on your site with a simple copy paste. All right, let's get into Navigator. Let's see the structure here. All of these are inside a WG element div. Inside the WG element div is the WG element wrapper. The WG element wrapper is what you're going to be copying and pasting onto your site. Next to the WG element wrapper is a code embed. This is a code embed specific to this element wrapper. So if I want to grab this one, I'm going to copy and paste this to my site, and I'm going to copy and paste the code block to my site. If I want to, let's say, implement this one, I'm going to open it up, and it has a WG element wrapper. I copy that, and then I copy this code block. This code block is specific to this element. This code block is specific to this element. So let's actually see this working. We're going to copy and paste into a test page in this build. So I'm going to copy. I've just copied this WG element wrapper. I'm going to go to our testing page. And here on our testing page, I have our testing nav menu, and I will paste this in. Cool. Now let's do a quick preview. Make sure the interactions are in. Great. Everything looking nice. Okay. Now we need to go and grab that code. So I'm going to go back to our home page. I'm going to go back to this same WG element wrapper and get the code from this code block right next to it. And I'm going to copy and paste this whole script. We're going to get into this code later, but for now, we're just copy and pasting and seeing it work. Cool. I'm going to go back to the testing page, open it up, and inside the page settings, I'm going to paste this in the body. Yes, I'm pasting it in the body, not the head. If you saw our standard setup walkthrough, we pasted this part of the code in the head. Since we're adding a bit more, we're now putting it in the body. All right, great. Now we're going to save it, and we're going to publish this, and we're going to see these UI elements working on our testing page. So I'm going to go and reload this testing page, and I am now loading new languages. So if you saw it just load French there before, that's because we were in the same build. French was the last language that we just loaded. So it just did a quick flash of French because we were on the same URL. It's just Weglot being smart and saying this is a French user, we're going to load French. But you can see that we have English, Deutsch, English, Deutsch. We have our Webflow interaction working. We have our custom code working, and everything is looking awesome. One last thing before we dive deeper into Designer is when you are pasting this code, please make sure that you are pasting your API key. If you just clone the site and copy and paste this code as is, it's not going to work. You need to have your URL set up in Weglot. You need to have your API key in this code. All right, cool, that's it. If you just want to copy and paste and see it work, you can do that same exact set of steps for any of these UI elements. All right, we're diving deeper. Let's see the structure. Now let's jump into the Weglot dashboard. There's a couple of things we did in here to use these custom UI switchers. All right, the first thing we did is we excluded some blocks. As we're using these custom switchers, we don't want them to translate along with the current language. So if let's say I'm changing to Spanish. If I change the site to Spanish, I don't want English to also translate to Inglés. That would not be good because maybe someone who is English speaking doesn't know that Inglés is English in Spanish. So we are excluding the WG element wrapper, and we know by now the WG element wrapper is the parent wrapper that has all of our buttons inside. So we are adding this as an excluded block. That means nothing inside of this wrapper is going to be translated by Weglot. We also have an add-on class called Weglot Exclude. If we don't want to translate something on the page, we can add Weglot Exclude to it, and Weglot says, all right, we're not going to translate it. We are also setting the Weglot container to display none. This is the default bottom right container that Weglot shows you for a language switcher. We don't want to see that. We're using a custom setup, so we're going to set that to display none so we don't have to see it or see it flash or anything. The very first thing you probably want to do is change the language of these UI components. Let's go and do that. It's super easy. We set it up in a very, very quick and simple way. Let's go back to the testing page, and we will see that these two links have custom data attributes attached to them. And these custom data attributes are lang, and the value is the language code that you want it to switch to. So let's say I want to change this Deutsch to French. What I'm going to do is change the value here to FR, and let's visibly change this to French. Cool. And that's it. Now when I go and republish this site, this whole entire site is now going to switch from English to French instead of English to German. And I'm going to go and confirm that right now. We're now loading French. And when I click on French, we are seeing a French translation, no longer a German translation. And this is working reliably as I switch back and forth. Cool. And this is the same process for all of them. Every single one of these UI components has a link, and that link has a data attribute of lang with the value of the language we're switching to. So you can go ahead and change the language to any of these. Same thing with the dropdown. Here we're in the dropdown and we see all of these different data attributes. All right, nice. Now we're going to dive even deeper into how these interactions are set up and why we're using two sets of interactions inside each component. Let's jump into these interactions. Let's see why we have two different types of interactions applied to each of these components. First, we have an interaction applied to every WG element wrapper. This is what you're going to copy paste into your build. We have an interaction that makes it go from opacity 0 to opacity 100%. We have interactions applied to the buttons within the element wrapper. These are the interactions that make it look like the language is switching. It's what makes this blue line go over to Deutsch. It's what makes this blue fill go over to French. It's what makes the drop-down opens trigger happen. So those are the more visual interactions. That's what makes it look nice. That's what makes it feel and look custom with Webflow Interactions. This WG element wrapper has an add-on class to it, and it has an element trigger of scroll into view. You can see we have all of these listed here, 1 through 9. And these are saying go opacity 0 to opacity 100% with a delay. What's the reason for this? You can see that when we're loading the page here, that this is going to load in with it. Nice. It looks nice. We have this loading. When we connect a subdomain, we are actually reloading the entire web page. We're loading a new URL. And because of that, Webflow Interactions is going to reset its initial state. So we have an initial state of this showing as English. If we reload the site in DE, that means Webflow is going to load it as a brand new web page. It's going to put that initial state back in there, and it's going to show as English, even though the site is translated in German. And same thing for all of these. I click on Spanish, and it's going to load the site in Spanish, but since we're loading a subdomain, it's going to restart that interaction. It's going to show its initial state, and it's going to look like English is selected. So again, we don't see that problem here when we're using the JavaScript method. We will see that problem when we connect a subdomain and the site is actually reloading with Webflow Interactions. So how do we fix this? We fix it with JavaScript, and all the JavaScript is in there ready to go for you. And the reason we have this interaction is so that the JavaScript can work and change that initial state before the user visibly sees the UI component. So this one has a 0.6 delay, and that's because it takes 0.6 seconds for us to make that visible change. So when I load the site in French, we're going to actually click on this secretly with JavaScript so that when the user sees this UI component, that it's going to say, we are in French. The site's in French, the UI switcher says French, and it's the same deal for all these. It's going to be a different set of delay because we need that 0.6 seconds to make that switch. This one maybe needs 0.4 seconds. This one needs 0.2 seconds. And great, now when this UI component is visible, it's showing at the correct place. So you can see that each one of these has its own add-on class with its own set of times. So if you are changing these interactions, let's say you want this to happen quicker, or you want it to take more time. Maybe you want it to be a 1 second change. You would go into this and you would change to a delay of 1 second. And that's going to make everything look nice when the user loads the page on a subdomain. Now let's jump into the custom code and see how this is working, understand the core concepts, and even go through some of it line by line. All right, we're going to jump into this code block that's directly next to the WG element wrapper. So we're dealing with this one. We're opening up this code block. And here when I open it up, you're going to see a very familiar line. This is what Weglot tells you to add to the site. And instead of closing the script right here, we're going to add this stuff. Great. First, we're going to start off basic. We're going to start off with the bare minimum that you should know and understand when you're making customizations. Then we're going to dive deeper. First, if you are changing the classes on your UI element, maybe you're removing the subdomain of U1, or you are changing the class entirely, please make sure you update the class in the code. It's very important that the classes match with this JavaScript because it's making it actually work. Without this JavaScript, you're not going to be able to change the language with Webflow Interactions. All right, so there you go. If you change WG element wrapper SW1, go and update that 3 times here in this code. And the next important part is understanding this timeout. This is saying that we are going to wait 160 milliseconds before we change the language. Why are we doing this? When we change the language with Weglot, by default, it's going to happen immediately. So I click on German and right away, it's going to start loading the German page. We want to wait just a little bit so that we can see this interaction happening. The whole point of using Webflow Interactions is to make your UI component feel custom and look pretty. So when we are changing from English to German, we want to see this change happen before we load the German site, right? You don't want it to click here and you don't even see the line move over to German. You want to see that line move. You want to see this box move. And in order to do that, we have to wait just a little bit to make that interaction happen and then load the translated site. So let's go back into this code and you'll see it takes 160 milliseconds. And that lines up just about to the delay that we set in that parent wrapper. Just a few seconds ago, I was talking about setting that delay to 0.2 seconds on that parent wrapper. That is lined up with this type of delay. And you'll see that when we go to a different one, this interaction takes longer for the fill to go over to French. So I bet this is going to be a longer delay. There you go. So we're going to wait 700 milliseconds before we actually change the language because we want to see this interaction happen. That's the most basic part of understanding this code, changing those 3 classes and updating the timeout if you are changing the length of the interaction. Now let's go even deeper into the code. Let's break down this code line by line. Here we are in the WG element wrapper, and we're going to take a look at the code block right next to it. We're going to open it up, and we're going to understand the 2 parts of this script. All these UI components have these 2 parts to them. Some have additional code added to it, but these are the 2 most basic parts to understand about this code. First is changing the language based on the language that is active. The next part is actually changing the language when the user clicks on the language change. So let's go over this one. On Weglot initialization, we're going to first get the current active language. If that's English, we're going to grab English. If it's German, we're going to grab German. We're going to store it as a variable called current lang. Then we're going to run an if statement, and we're going to say if our WG element wrapper, the links and languages inside of that parent element, if they are the current language, we need to run a click on that item. So we're going to find that current language. If it's German, we're going to run a click on that German. Look at how this code is just about the same here. Same thing, same thing. We're just adding a click. Nice. So if it's German, we're going to run a click on German right away. And that is going back to what we have been talking about. We want to make sure that when they load that site in French, that French is showing in the UI component. So that's what this code is doing. It's going to run that click immediately so that the initial state of English showing in the UI component is not actually showing. It's going to be showing the active language. Okay, that's part one. Let's go into this part two, where it's actually going to change the language in a custom way. With Weglot, they have a way to create your language button with an href. You can add an href tag and you can put your link in and it's going to change the language for you. Because we're working with Webflow Interactions, we're moving to a data attribute based language switcher. So you saw in the previous part of this video that we're using lang equals DE for German, lang equals FR for French, and we're using that data attribute to change the language. This is making sure that that actually works. It's going to take that data attribute method that we created and make sure that we're actually changing to German when German is clicked. So for each of the WG element wrapper links, every single one of them in the list, whether it's 5 of them in a dropdown, 2 of them side by side, we're going to target all of them. We're going to listen for a click. We're going to take that link inside of our element wrapper and we're going to wait for it to be clicked on. When it's clicked on, we're going to run a function. Prevent default, make sure that the standard behavior of clicking on a link is not happening. We're doing something custom here. And that custom is setting a timeout of 160 seconds. And after 160 seconds, we are going to Weglot switch to. It's a method inside Weglot that's allowing us to switch to a language. We're going to switch to this get attribute lang. This refers to the link that we are using inside the function. So this link, we're going to get the data attribute of that link, get the value of the language, and then switch to that language. So we're making sure that this data attribute method that we're setting up works for us. And that's it. Those are the 2 core parts of these scripts that you have to understand. Now let's jump into the dropdown, for example, which has another aspect part of it. Let's go into the dropdown. I'm going to open this up. Actually, I'm not going to open it up. No reason to do that. And we're going to go to this code block. Great, let's open it up. And you'll see a bit more here. So we have our getting current language. It's the same concept. We're taking a few different lines and moving them down here, but we are getting the current language. We're making sure that our data attribute switching method works. And for something like the dropdown, we need to add another piece of code that's making sure the text and the link inside the dropdown are updating as we create this new active language. So this does not happen by default with Webflow Interactions. It doesn't happen by default when you just connect Weglot without any of this custom code. So look what happens here. Not in preview, of course, on a published site with the code working. If I'm in English and I switch to Spanish, I would want Spanish to switch to the top of the list, right? I don't want English to now just show on top, even though we have a Spanish translated site. Same with French. If I change to French, I want French to show on the first spot of the dropdown. So when I close the dropdown, it shows French. Same thing with all these. We have the horizontal switcher. We want that to now show French here. And this dropdown is the same thing. So that's what this next piece of code is doing. The next piece of code is all of this is making sure that when we switch that language, we reorder the links to make sure the active language is showing first. And as you go through some of these, you may find some of those slight customizations to make sure that we're showing that active language. What I just went over is really the core of what you have to understand. You don't need to know every single line here. It's all working. It's been tested on subdomains. It's been tested on webflow.io links, and it is ready for use with a copy and paste. Thanks, everybody. We are pumped to see what you can do with Weglot and Webflow. Translating your website is so important, and Weglot makes it so easy for us. Thank you, Weglot team. Thank you, Finsweet team, for collaborating to make this video walkthrough series possible. The promo page, the UI kit, these videos, it's all because we care about bringing this knowledge to you. If you have any questions, please reach out to the Weglot support team at support@weglot.com. Happy translating and enjoy.